Another Premier League striker has been linked. There's interest in a potential centre-back target from a European giant, and we'll also be looking at the situation with Newcastle CEO Chase. This is the NUFC Transfer Daily, and let's get into it. Good morning, welcome back to my channel, welcome to another video. Thanks so much for all the support, continuing as I've gone daily with my YouTube channel. Lots of views, lots of likes, lots of comments, keep it all coming. And if you haven't already, do please subscribe because it really makes a difference. Today we're going to be talking about a striker target that dropped last night on Sky Sports News, and also interest from PSG in a player that Newcastle have long courted. But we're going to start with that striker target. It is Joao Pedro. This is not a surprise, I think, because Joao Pedro is a player that Newcastle have liked for a long time. He was their main target after Hugo Ekitike and before Alexander Isak. There was a lot of talk. Obviously, Fabrizio Romano did the famous "here we go" over a £30 million move for Joao Pedro from Watford when he was 2021. He's 23 now, so again, going back to what I said yesterday, that's the sort of age range that Newcastle are looking for. It seems like he would be a perfect fit stylistically, but there's a huge problem, and again it's the repeat of the Liam Delap issue. He has apparently said that he'll only consider a move to a club where he'll be the number one striker, where he pretty much is at Brighton, and we all know that just isn't going to be the case at Newcastle because Alexander Isak is there, and that is, we've spoken about it before, I've written a piece for Forbes on it as well. That's the big issue that Newcastle face, because there's a real desperate need for a striker. I was on the True Faith podcast yesterday, we were talking about needs for positions, and obviously we discussed right winger and centre back. Everybody knows right winger and centre back is where Newcastle desperately need upgrades, but I sort of brought to the table the need for a striker as well, because we've seen what happens with Isak when he's far too overused. He doesn't get opportunities to ease fitness issues, and that's sort of created this myth that he's a little bit injury prone. I think if you allowed him the opportunity to rest a bit more, that would be needed. So Joao Pedro would for me be the perfect striker for that in many ways. But there are reasons why this is a non-start. Yes, Champions League games. Yes, there'll be league games. There'll be opportunities. He'll play a lot of football if he came to Newcastle. But it's the principle that I mentioned about Delap and other players, about being the second choice, about accepting your position on that opening day of the season on the bench. There have been talks that Newcastle are interested in another top striker to pair him with Isak, but I find that difficult to believe because I think Eddie Howe has really wedded to this 4-3-3 system. I know he's like 4-4-2 in the past, but I think the midfield would be much more of an issue if he suddenly went to 4-4-2. It wouldn't work for me, so I think that that's unlikely. So a striker that comes in is going to be, maybe can pair with Isak in certain games, like Wilson did at the back end of 22-23 when Newcastle got fourth, and that really worked extremely well. But generally they're going to be playing in place of or creating competition for Isak. And as I say, there aren't many better options than Joao Pedro, I think, in terms of a player who fits the bill of somebody who isn't quite there yet. He's a really, really good player. But he isn't sort of prolific enough to hang your hat on in that sense. But I think that's where he would become, similarly to Isak, I think he would become that prolific player. He scored 18 goals like 2 seasons ago in all competitions, lots of penalties in there as well, and obviously he had European football, but 9 Premier League goals is a decent return. Is it enough to pay what Brighton would undoubtedly want for him, because the fact that they paid 30 million for him, they'd want probably double that. You see what Newcastle have faced with Brian Mbeumo, Manchester United are now going to face with Brian Mbeumo. The fact that £60 million in the Premier League era doesn't go that far in terms of getting you a bona fide world-class player anymore. I think as much as I like Joao Pedro, there is an element of risk with it. You are going and buying potentially still only 23, and that's too much to spend on a player who isn't going to be playing all the time and isn't necessarily going to be happy in his role. But also, it's a bigger, wider point that I've made. Yesterday's whole video was looking away from the Premier League, and this is why. It's because you are not going to get very far with £60 million in the Premier League, and we'll come on to this with Illia Zabarnyi in a minute as well. If you constantly link yourself to domestic targets. And there are two reasons why this is constantly happening, because every player that Newcastle have been seriously linked with this summer, and even last summer, if you think about Elise and Mark Gahey, have been Premier League based. And that's because it's easier to report on those on both ends. It's easier to find somebody from the Brighton end to say that Newcastle have lodged an interest in Joao Pedro, whereas when you're going for a player from abroad, Newcastle don't tend to leak much, and there's not very much you can chase from the opposite end, because British media doesn't have reporters all up and down the countries in Spain, France, Germany and wherever else. So that's one reason. But the other reason is because this maybe fits into what Eddie Howe wants, is a more domestic approach, more guaranteed on that the player will be able to come in and hit the ground running, because that's what he wants. His demands are so high, and I fully understand that. But the problem with that is that that's what people charge for. The expectation that if he's in a better team, he'll get more chances, he'll score more goals. That's what Brighton are charging for, the Premier League experience, the fact that you're not taking a risk, whether they'll settle in the league and settle in the country, because he's already done that previously at two different clubs. So that's why the prices are so high. And I think that's why, one, I think Newcastle are looking abroad. I've said that yesterday, I've said that so many times, but they need to look abroad as well. They need to go and find the players that they need to sign. The players that have had most success signing have been in that sort of 30 to 40 million pound bracket, with the exception of Tonali and Isak, who also came from abroad but were higher ceiling signings. If you look at Botman, if you look at Bruno, you look at Gordon, Livramento, Hall, they've all been around that sort of price point, and that's what I would be looking for. If Newcastle have 100 and 150 million, whatever they have to spend this summer, it's a decent amount, we know that, then spend it on as many of those types of players as you can to strengthen across the board. That's what I'd certainly do. And I think Joao Pedro, if you're going to spend £60 million on somebody, it needs to be somebody who's got a higher ceiling, got Champions League experience, proven themselves at a higher level than Joao Pedro. As much as I really rate him, I think the fact that you're spending £60 million on players who played for Brentford and Brighton and Bournemouth, that type of thing, it does really show where domestic money goes these days, and it doesn't go very far at all. So I would look at this one as I think Newcastle's interest is definitely there. I think they've obviously liked him because they chased him before and they nearly signed him before. So that doesn't stop. They'll have kept watching him and kept an eye on him. And I do think he's absolutely good enough. He could grow into that player at Newcastle. He could become a better player, but he won't be happy with the role he's got. And that just means that this is a non-starter. I will look at doing some videos on potential targets that I think Newcastle should target. Let me know in the comment section if you want to see a striker video like the one that I did yesterday on wingers and potential options from abroad and players that I think Newcastle should sign. Let me know if you want that in the comment section below. I'll happily oblige on that, but I do think that this one is far-fetched because the price is wrong. The fact that they're shopping again in domestic markets is risky, and also the fact that he just won't sit on the bench, and that's the problem that Newcastle are going to get. If you're going to get anyone established to play up front, it's going to be difficult. You have to take it. There has to be an element of risk. There has to be somebody you're a young player you're sort of putting a bit of faith in, because that's the sort of role of somebody who will take it, and it has to be the right player. Joao Pedro in so many ways ticks many boxes, but he doesn't tick the crucial ones for me. Reports in France that PSG have bid for Illia Zabarnyi from Bournemouth. That would be a big blow, because I know a lot of people have said in the comment section that they have him as their preferred centre-back target. He's very good at playing the ball out from the back. He's got a good yard of pace on him. He's really developed excellently since he joined Bournemouth for 24 million from Dino Kiev in 2023. So I think that there's a real development there. Again, a great option, but again it comes back to that domestic signing. You're asking a lot for him to step up and develop. He's certainly got the talent, he's certainly the right profile. I'm not sure he's quite as physical as maybe Newcastle would need personally, but other than that, he's a very, very good defender. I won't go into all the stats because I think with both Pedro and Zabarnyi, you've seen him, you've seen the eye test. There's no explaining who these guys are really. So the fact that Newcastle have got an interest in him, again, sort of linking back to what I said about Joao Pedro, it's the same sort of thing. But PSG making this bid would be interesting to see if Newcastle would react. Again, I think he's on the list. I think we need to learn from the Mbumo situation and James Maddison and Lucas Paquetá. If another club bids for a player, it doesn't mean that Newcastle have lost out. It just suggests that maybe Newcastle are looking elsewhere. And we know that Newcastle, and this is a caveat to this whole video again, we know Newcastle do act behind closed doors and surprise us with players from abroad. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that they go and find a deal for somebody like that. Guéhi seems to be the more noisy in terms of the domestic targets, and I think if PSG have bid, doesn't explain what the bid is, but French journalist Fabrice Hawkins has reported that Luis Campos, the sporting director of PSG, was in Bournemouth on Monday to bid for Zabarnyi. It'd be interesting to see how far that goes. They would charge probably roughly 45-50 million again to sell him off the back of the Dean Howson going to Real Madrid. So I think it'll be really difficult to do that deal, and I think Newcastle will probably look elsewhere for a more cost-effective target. Whether that's Marc Guéhi because his contract is running down, I don't know. Malik Thiaw is still very much liked at Newcastle, but he struggled last season a bit at AC Milan for game time again. Ousmane Diomande is a player that I'd absolutely think would be perfect for Newcastle stylistically, but again a bit young, a bit raw. See what the sort of deal is there, but I think that the price point for Zabarnyi and the fact that Newcastle are now, by the sounds of it, battling against the European champions to sign him, it'll be very difficult to see this one get done. I know a lot of people in the comment section have said that he's their preferred player, and he's a very, very good defender. He's developed a lot, but Newcastle need to be going and finding the players at source rather than signing the likes of Pedro, the likes of Dean Howson that we're interested in, Zabarnyi, all of those players once they've developed, unless the price is right, which I think that's the caveat with Guéhi, is that potentially this summer, with only a year in his contract and the fact that he's not going to sign a new one, the fact that could really reduce the price, even though Steve Parish has been really difficult to negotiate with in the past. That's the only way Newcastle will do that deal. I think Bournemouth would be a lot more difficult to talk to about Zabarnyi, especially with PSG in as well. So a message from me is to steer away from domestic targets generally. That doesn't mean players from English clubs can't be good deals, but they have to be at the right price. And I don't think Pedro or Zabarnyi will be sold to Newcastle for the right price. Just quickly before we wrap up, we've got a bit of an update on the CEO chase with obviously Darren Eales is about to leave because he's served his pretty much a year notice in September that he was suffering with blood cancer, so he's stepping down, which is obviously a very, very sad state of affairs. But Newcastle have moved on to David Hopkinson from Canada, apparently, former Real Madrid head of global partnerships. That shows that he does have the sort of right credentials for this job. It's obviously going to be a big new phase for Newcastle with hopefully more Champions League football, more big deals to do and all of that sort of thing that haven't really kicked off under Eales. Obviously been a very difficult phase with in terms of growing that. This is a new kick-on phase. I think they need somebody who's got that experience. But the one thing I would say is, whoever the CEO is, there needs to be more power on the UK side, because lots of things that emanate from, and this is a big reason why Dan Ashworth left as sporting director, for example, the power that the UK board or the people on the ground in the UK have doesn't really compare to Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, and lots of the decisions have been sort of okayed by Yasser Al-Rumayyan over in Saudi Arabia. And I think that's a bit of a problem, because it means that Newcastle are perceived to act slowly, and that's why Eddie Howe made a big case for acting quickly this summer, hitting the ground running, and people were already getting worried. And I think I'm not saying that Newcastle are acting slowly, but I think there needs to be more power, there needs to be more delegation on the side of the Saudis to allow the people, the CEO, whoever it is, to make actual decisions and be held accountable by those decisions, because at the moment it feels like the decisions are all being okayed by Riyadh, and I think that is ultimately a bit of a problem. The other thing, just to mention, that broke yesterday, is that Newcastle will be playing Atletico Madrid in the Sella Cup this summer, and that's going to be really exciting. Hopefully I'll be there to bring you a vlog, as I have been in the last couple of years. But thanks so much for joining me again on this video. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.